Thank you for joining us today. It's going to be a great show. Today's show is about a controversial study that is really calling the serotonin depression link into question. So we're going to talk with Jennifer Kozek today as she talks about some alternative ways that we can look at helping loved ones with depression and what this controversial study might mean to the treatment of depression moving forward. So stick around. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Spectrum Report. My name is Gabriel Williams, and I'm the CEO of Spectrum Research Group. We are the makers of Neural Balance with Anandinol. And if you're interested to learn more about Neural Balance with Anandinol, see how it might help you or a loved one on or off the spectrum with depression, anxiety, sleep, focus, you can check that out on our website, neuralbalance.com, and just click on how it works. You can also learn more about us on our Facebook page. We have videos, prior shows, and resources there. And we also have a support group that's great for peer-to-peer support. Facebook, you can find that also on Facebook. Just search Neural Balance Support Group. And of course, this show, The Spectrum Report, is available on YouTube as well as Facebook. And if you're in for a little controversial content that we're not really allowed to display on our other social media platforms, you can also search the Spectrum Report Uncensored on Rumble. So we are really happy that you're here today. As I mentioned in the teaser, we are talking about a controversial study that was recently put out that may change the way we approach depression moving forward. So I have my guest today, Jennifer Kozek. She is the author of Healing Without Hurting. She's a board-certified psychotherapist. She has a Master of Science in Counseling and is certified in integrative medicine for mental health. And she has an extensive experience in private practice. She specializes in working with ADHD, depression, anxiety, OCD, and autism. So her expertise is right up our alley for today's show. So without further ado, I would like to introduce and welcome to the show, Jennifer Kozek. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So you've been on a few times, and you're a very busy person. On top of everything I just read here, you're also constantly updating your education for your Healing Without Hurting page. Busy mother, busy practice, busy helping other people. And now we've talked a couple times. Tell us about the books that you've put out. You have one that I love. It's for parents and caregivers mainly, but another one that's also for the kids and siblings. And I think that's a good addition too. So tell us a little bit about those books. And then I'd love to hear about what you're up to now as far as your new education series that you have.
Yeah, thank you. So my Healing Without Hurting book was published first in 2014. And then it was republished in 2018 to update, to make as many updates as possible, because this field of science is forever changing. Because my book often will talk about the fact that this is not a brain imbalance. So, what's coming out now, I think, is a lot of what the functional medicine doctors, naturopathic physicians, nutritionists have known. But we'll get into that. So, so the book was really about, how do we treat our children without potentially harmful medication? And, it started because of my own two children, one being on the autism spectrum, and then one having some autoimmune encephalitis issues. So she, will get psychiatric symptoms if she has too much inflammation going on in her body due to many different factors, which we do now believe that autism is also part of that equation. So it's, brain encephalitis, neurotransmitter imbalances, but really more in the gut nutritional deficiencies, where you come in as far as, providing the body with what it needs to survive and to thrive. And
Hmm.
definitely, our mainstream doctors are just not schooled in this. So I knew once I found better alternatives, more than conventional medicine had to offer, that I had to put it out there. So I wrote my book, Healing Without Hurting. I was also on the board of Epidemic Answers for a time, and I helped co-write a book called Brain Under Attack, which is also a fantastic natural book about how to heal these children with pediatric autoimmune encephalitis, which is this PANS diagnosis, which
Hmm.
OCD, anxious, depressed, even psychotic. So, we really, and ODD, oppositionally defiant. A lot of these kids, unless of course they had some kind of traumatic event in their life, which is, could be the case, and we have to treat that. But there are so many things that we could do to bring down this inflammation. So that was the second book. And then the other book was a child book. It was called ADHD, Happy and Free ADHD Free, which is basically a child book available on Amazon, that just really, it's for like a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old. It just explains what mom is doing when she's taking her to a naturopathic physician, and why we want to get food sensitivity testing, and we want to test for nutritional deficiencies and things like that. So it's just, written for children. That book was self-published, and is available as well on Amazon.
Yeah, one of the things I liked about it is it's just a great way to explain to your child what's going on. Sometimes we maybe forget to get down to their level and explain, this is why we're going to these doctors. This is why we're, talking to all these people. They're asking you so many questions, and keeping it. Now mom's writing everything I eat, in a diary. It can be a strange experience for the kids. So that's one thing I really liked. And it's great for reading to the siblings too, so they can kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah. And
But
it's so important for people to realize that this is medical, that this is not, psychological. And I think if we took that stigma away and started treating the medical component of this, we'd have a lot more success, and there'd be a lot
mm,
less stigma around mental health in general.
right. Yeah, I think I've had parents tell me, they hear somebody, their kid's having a meltdown, and you hear somebody, you need to discipline your kid. Like, you can't beat this out of somebody. Like, you have to love them, you have to support them, you have to figure out what their triggers are. It's not a lack of discipline by any means. So,
No.
and that's where I think something else that you have going on, something new that you have in the works that's coming up, just in about a month or so, would can be very helpful. You have a whole integrative health series that you're now teaching, and that's all online, right?
Yeah, so it's going to be great because it's going to be originally done live, and then there's going to be Q&A. But we anticipate there will be people joining us that cannot get on every Tuesday night, or might be in a different time zone. So it will be available online even after the whole course is finished. So it's going to be 15 weeks, about an hour to an hour and a half per session. Trying to keep it to layman's terms for parents, nutritionists, even pediatricians really should get on here and just learn a little bit of something about all of these issues. So I'm going to be talking about gut health. I'm going to talk about toxicity. I'm going to talk about, foods that heal. So it's a pretty comprehensive, workshop, and it's going to be available, beginning on September 6th, which is a Tuesday night. And in addition to that, at the end of actually next week, I'll be at Autism One, doing my speech on beyond speech therapy and all the things we could be doing for our kids that's, beyond just taking them to speech therapy, and also
Right.
a whole presentation on pediatric autoimmune encephalitis and what we could do for the kids that are suffering with this, which will also be a part of my 15-week series as well.
Okay, that's great. So this is something that somebody with a new diagnosis, somebody that's been working through this for years, someone who serves other people, whether it's their own children or someone in practice. So basically, if you're any way, shape, or form involved with the industry of autism or the spectrum, or if you have a loved one, or you even personally are suffering from any of these types of um, I don't really want to call it disability, but challenges, because for some it is, for some it isn't. So, but does seem to be challenging for everyone. So if you're in the industry or you're helping to care for someone, or you yourself have any of these challenges, that sounds like a really good resource. Intensive, but I mean, this is an intense life. So I think the more education that we can get, the better. So we'll have a link in the description. I love that the resources will be available to people afterwards. So that means that if someone's watching this in 6 months or a year and they still want to access that course, that they can do that. So we'll put a link in the description of the video here, as well as links to other how they can get your books and learn more about what your work at Healing Without Hurting. So be happy to pass that helpful resource on. So now, one of the reasons, the main reason we wanted to bring you on, you and I did a show. You were a very helpful guest. We talked about how to recognize some of the signs of depression in children, as that is a growing problem. It seems that children at younger and younger ages are starting to struggle with depression, and that it's definitely a larger percentage of the population, and in some cases much more severe even than you were used to seeing, probably as little as a few years ago. So we talked about that on a prior show. And since then, this study came out, and as soon as I saw it, I just thought, man, this is not surprising, but I wonder what the change is going to be. And I just want to briefly. So this was a study that was done by two psychiatrists, Joanna Moncrief and Mark Horowitz. And this was published in the journal Molecular Psychiatry in just this past July 2022. And it basically concluded that there's no proven link between a lack of serotonin and depression. And in some ways that surprised me, but then in other ways it didn't, because we often hear that you just can't stop being depressed. You can't just work your way out of it. You can't just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I think there is some truth to that, to an extent. And then I think before that, connection just gave the big pharma industry an excuse to just throw more and more drugs at kids and adults. So in a way, I say that this is kind of good news, that we've seen that this link that we depended on so strongly doesn't exist. So that would hopefully cause us to start looking outside that realm. Many people do, yourself included, but mainstream medical is not one of them. They have a pretty standard approach. So now another psychiatrist, Phil Cohen, said that no mental health professional would endorse the view that a complex condition like depression stems from a deficiency in a single neurotransmitter. So he at least is willing to admit that's not the only thing. But Moncrief, one of the psychiatrists that actually performed the study, conducted the study, she's a bit skeptical of mainstream medicine already. So she's been looking for something, a way to break the mainstream's crutch, so to speak. So she believes that the serotonin theory still occupies an important but less prominent role in the treatment of depression. So basically, she's not suggesting that we interrupt any medical interventions that we currently have going, but that she would use this as a piece of the puzzle as we're looking at individual treatments, that we would not totally change course suddenly, but that there is definitely evidence because of this for an alternative, right? To look in some different ways. So what's the current understanding of the serotonin depression connection? Is it really just as simple as you're missing a serotonin molecule, so therefore we're blaming that for the depression?
Well, I mean, I think it's very convenient for the pharmaceutical companies because then they keep the narrative going, and then they have these drugs that are supposed to reuptake these chemicals in the brain, and so therefore it sells a lot of drugs, right? So I really think a lot of the labels, even the DSM-5, is written by pharmaceutical companies. I mean, the medical schools are funded by so this has been something like in all of these conversations, it's really just what's been fed us in the last like 50 years of without really talking about, well, what about the other research? Because there's
Mm,
research and there's so much information about, this might blow people away right now listening to this, but depression, obviously we're looking at trauma and we're looking at those underlying conditions and things that happen in people's lives, but on top of that, it's actually an inflammatory disease. And when we ask why, well, why do some antidepressants work, right? Because some people will say, well, is it a placebo? Like, why is it working? If you look at how the mechanism of the antidepressant, it's actually an anti-inflammatory. There's
mm,
anti-inflammatory properties in these drugs. And so if you lower the inflammation response, yes, it could potentially like help the body, right? So you take a psychotic person, you give them an anti-inflammatory, and suddenly, and I think the pharmaceutical companies know this, and that's why when they design these chemical concoctions, it's like it's not really that special of news. I mean, it is because I think it's something that the most people in America and in the world have never really heard, and we always thought is just because of the serotonin. Serotonin, 95% is in the gut. The
mm.
inflammation I'm talking about is actually inflammation in the gut. Toxins in the gut causing inflammation, whether there's Lyme disease hanging out or strep hanging out, or our bodies can't even handle viruses anymore because of the amount of toxic load that we have created in our bodies. I mean, if we look at our body like a container, it only can handle so much. And once it starts coming over the top, the immune system goes into gear. The immune system is there to protect us. So what it does is the glutamates go up. That's going to cause OCD and really bad anxiety. The histamines go up, which can cause anxiety, depression. And then the inflammation goes up as a way of trying to protect our bodies from an assault. So it's almost like the immune system is on overdrive, right? And we can talk about all the reasons and all the toxins, whether they're injected, they're inhaled, or whether they're eaten, fills that container.
All of the above, right? I
All of
mean, our diet, our environment, our soaps, our dish soap. I mean, everything. These
everything
days,
these days, and who knows what they're spraying in the air and what they're, I mean, everyone's like, well, our bodies can handle some poison. Well, of course it can, but when it's poison on top of poison on top of poison, then we're wondering why our immune systems are overreacting, why we're having an autoimmune response. And that, in some people that comes out as depression and anxiety, some people that comes out as lupus or a multiple sclerosis, or the 101 different autoimmune disorders. Everybody, and that everyone gets diagnosed with a different one, but basically it's all the same. It's called an autoimmune problem,
right?
disorder, right? So, I mean, we can call it anything we want, but we know that people with MS, people with lupus also have tremendous amount of anxiety. And so what do? We put in an SSRI, and then we're given steroids for the inflammation. And then a cocktail of medication. And when you have a side effect, then they just give you another medication. So
Right.
when we start looking at this holistically, which means we look at the whole body, we look at how every organ affects everything, methylation, how well our body's detoxing, when we're looking at how full our container is and how do we reduce the load of that container, all of a sudden people start improving.
Well, and it's interesting. I didn't know that some of the drugs that they give for that have anti-inflammatory properties.
Yeah.
But one of the comments that I saw as pushback against this study, that serotonin is not chemically connected to depression. One of the points of pushback was, but depression responds to the drugs that we give that promote the uptake of serotonin. So the conclusion was, because this works, then that connection is valid and the study must be flawed. But
Right.
then that same person went on to admit that most patients are on such a cocktail or so many different medications that they couldn't be 100% sure that it was that drug for that purpose that gave the positive outcome. So it is interesting to know that many of these medications have anti-inflammatory properties, just like there's another guy that I've watched and read a couple of his books, and he points to a fungus basis for a lot of things, and he'll point out that some of the drugs that they give you to treat certain things are also an antifungal, right? But
Right.
that's not the main purpose. That's not what they talk about when they give it to you.
Right.
They just, give it to you and say, this will help. But come to find out that it's an antifungal,
Right.
and that condition is aggravated by fungus in the system. So
Right.
they're saying this is helping that, but they're not really correct always on the mechanism,
Right.
which I think can be dangerous, and it can be unhelpful. If you don't know the real reason why something is helping,
Right.
then you don't know the real way to prevent that from continuing or increasing. And if fungus or inflammation is the basis of something that you're suffering from,
Yeah.
it seems like it would be so much easier to address that through diet and other ways than just dealing with the symptoms,
Hmm.
which come out as depression or pain or joint pain or muscle pain, whatever the case is. Um, so I found that that's very interesting, actually, that they do have that connection. So what does this study then mean for the future? Like I said, even the doctor who would love for mainstream medicine to look at alternative treatments, and even the same doctor that funded or that performed this study and found that there's no connection, even she says we shouldn't just discontinue. What are some of the alternatives? Do you think this might be a help or a hindrance towards looking for alternatives, and what could we do?
So, I mean, I really hope. I was very hopeful when I heard about this study coming out, and I noticed it was also being shown mainstream media, which I was really, really surprised actually. A lot of people, the cognitive dissonance around this, because it's something that's been taught to us for so long that it's so hard for people to wrap their head around that there might be another way. But I'm hopeful that over time it will just be like, the medical doctors will start catching up with the rest of us that have known this for a very long time. And that, the problem is the pharmaceutical companies being so strong that, okay, so it's not serotonin and it is inflammation. The pharmaceutical companies will just come up with they'll just call it something else. And
It's funny that's what I was thinking. The conspiracy
I-
theorist in me, although I'm not that far along, but I do see things that don't seem to make sense sometimes. And that was one of the first things that when you said the same thing I said when I saw it first. I'm surprised this made the mainstream media.
right.
And then you thought the same thing I probably did, or you probably thought the same thing I did right on the heels of that.
Yeah.
So what do they have in the pipeline
Hmm.
that they'll introduce next month
Right.
so that they can say, well, this connection isn't there, but we have something that costs a little more
Right.
that will work better.
Right.
Um, and is, of course, covered by every government in the world.
And
What?
it's all coming from nature. So what they do is they take from nature and they bring it to a lab and they recreate what God already provided us and call it their discovery. Okay. So
Right.
what I've learned through this is for every medication, there is an equal, if not better, natural remedy, which does the same thing, especially our herbs. Right. So if you take something like Tamiflu, most people don't understand. Star anise, which is an herb, is actually the active ingredient in Tamiflu, right?
Mm.
Without the side effects. You take an antibiotic. Antibiotics also regulate the immune system. They don't necessarily kill the pathogen because the pathogens are getting smarter than the antibiotics. So when you go to treat Lyme disease, which will also cause inflammation, just like mold or yeast, the immune system, these buggers, they like to wrap themselves up in biofilm, and they dig deeper into your cells. And, we can kind of get into conspiracy theory a little bit about what happens to the viruses. Are they man-made? There's probably more to that equation, and as far as why are they going intercellularly. Viruses are now burying themselves intercellularly, and then is the antibiotic actually driving them into the cell? That's why I prefer herbal medicine, because herbs will feed the good biome and kill the bad. Also, it will disrupt the biofilm because the plants are very much more intelligent. And in addition, it's going to reduce the inflammation at the same time, because you're actually aiding the body instead of pouring more chemicals into an already overburdened system.
Mm.
For so many reasons, like, we should all be looking back at the plants and the stems and the roots. And then homeopathy, which is medicine of 3,000 plus years, that actually is a gentle nudge to the immune system to do what it was designed to do. So when I treat my daughter, by the way, last 6 months has been hell, but thank God we knew what to do. She was diagnosed, with an autoimmune disorder and brain encephalitis. And if I took her to mainstream doctors, they would put her on steroids. They would put her on antipsychotic medication because she was literally acting psychotic. And instead, we got to the bottom of it. Lyme, it was Lyme co-infections. We were dealing with mycoplasma pneumonia. The immune system was not doing what it was supposed to do to eliminate these things, and mold toxicity, both from environmental mold and food mold, because we do a lot of organic food. And I wonder, sometimes when you eat organic food, they go bad very quickly. So you
Right.
eat potatoes and, you won't get the glyphosate potentially, which is a good thing. But at the same time, if it's not 1 day old, like mold. So it's, and you get aflatoxins, which build up in the gut. So one of the things we could do, which it's a very simple remedy, is actually doing a binder. So one of the most helpful things we could do for her while she was going through this flare was we provided her body in the morning, first thing in the morning, an hour or two before food, we would give her a binder, which consists of activated charcoal, humic acid, apple pectin, and a couple other ingredients that actually bind with the mycotoxins and the toxins in the gut and eliminate them. Because she has an elimination problem. We're finding more and more people, us, have genetic mutations. I go way into this in the presentation, but we also have mutations, genetic mutations, not so much genetics, but what happens to our genetics, and that we're not detoxing well. So not only are we burdening our bodies with all this toxin and the inflammation is going crazy, but our bodies are not cycling it out fast enough. So we have to give the body what it needs to be able to process better.
Right, to help with that detox.
Yeah.
And a lot of that can be done with a good diet, but not all of it. So, one thing as you were talking about this, I was reminded, um, Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he says, I was listening to a podcast, he was being interviewed, and he said one of the first things that he does with a new patient who suffers from depression or anxiety, or any sensory type issues or mild depression, anxiety, was that he suggests that they go on a high protein, low carb diet, no simple carbs. If you normally wake up in the morning and have toast, he says wake up and have eggs, no toast, no simple grains or any of that in the morning. And he says that just that change in diet, going to the ones that actually take the advice and go to high protein, low carb,
Yep.
he starts seeing an improvement in them and in the physical attributes of their anxiety and sensory and depression, so that it makes the work that he does with them as far as helping to build their resiliency and troubleshoot, problem solve, deal with disappointment and whatever, work, it makes that more effective, and he starts seeing an improvement in them even sooner, which makes sense because the thing about meat is it doesn't just taste good. You're eating something that ate and processed
Mhm.
all of these plants and oats and different, so there's the iron and the enzymes, and you're getting a concentration of a wide variety of plants and grains. So meat, high protein, low carbs, you have less chance of there being fungus or mold or something like that in the diet. So he saw an advantage to it right away. And I imagine a big part of that is the anti-inflammatory aspect of it. So do you typically recommend elimination diets? Do you use them yourself? What's your opinion on that?
So when we're working with a child, for example, that has behavioral problems or brain fog, ADHD, whatever, we often, will look for food sensitivity testing to see if there's anything, gluten, dairy seems to be like really high on that list. And so sometimes, yes, you have to kind of eliminate those foods, at least while you're repairing the gut. And then we can have a whole discussion on why gluten and dairy probably isn't good for anyone. But like, besides that, the other big thing though is sugar. Like right after the pandemic, I want to say, like right when things started lifting, whatever, I felt horrible, right? I had COVID. Like I was exhausted. I had brain fog. I mean, you hear a lot of these long haul COVID people that like, um, it's sugar. It's partly sugar, right? So I did a whole bunch of testing to find out, like, here I am eating organic food and thinking I'm doing a fabulous job, doing gluten free, but I was eating lots of rice, lots of corn, lots of, I mean, I think probably, a lot of us probably drank too much, and I'm not even a drinker, but like I probably was, for me. And I went to a naturopath for myself because I felt like crap. And I did my blood work, and my ALT, which is my fatty liver, which comes from sugar, was elevated. My triglycerides were elevated. And when I did a thermoscan on my whole body, there were red spots like everywhere. And so chronic illness starts before it shows up as real symptoms, right? So I didn't have really bad arthritic pain or anything, but I was close. And so I went to a keto light, I would call it, because I think pure keto, when you're putting yourself in ketosis, is very stressful on the adrenals, very stressful on your body, and probably not recommended for children specifically. And we need a little sugar, I have to say, like our brains need a little bit. But besides the protein, we also need a high fat diet. So we find that a lot of these kids, healthy fats like avocados and nuts and seeds and even bacon. I mean, that's not that a healthy fat, but it's good. It's actually because our brains are like,
I like the way you think.
yes, because our brains are 60 to 70% fat. We don't recognize that our brains, it's like the grease on the wheels of the car, right? Our brains need that. So I have seen so many people on cholesterol lowering medication, by the way, who have been completely suicidal because their cholesterol is like at 120. And when you talk to the cardiologist, they say, oh, that's perfectly fine. No, it's not. Not if you want to be able to think, not if you want to be able to concentrate, not like if you want to be in a good mood, like that's not good. So yes, a higher fat, higher protein. The proteins will break down into amino acids, which do help to create our neurotransmitters because they are still important, although they're in the gut, not in the brain as much as you think. But all of those things, and the lower the inflammation, because the sugar feeds the yeast in our gut. So yeast is a huge contributor of brain fog, and most people that have reflux actually have yeast. People that snore, yeast. People that have depression, yeast. People that have anxiety, yeast in their gut. So my naturopath recommended I go on oregano tablets for a month, 30 days, and cut my sugar down to 50 grams a day, which seems like a lot of sugar, but it's really not when you start like looking at the back of I don't know, ice, I would drink iced tea thinking that was better than soda, right? And I'd flip over and I'd notice it's like 36 grams of sugar, right? That was almost my whole day supply. So I literally cut it out. Like I stopped with, the pasta and all of the rice that I was eating.
And that's the unseen, that's the hidden sugar that people don't think about, right? They go, oh, I don't do sugar. I'm not a, pie and cake and I don't do that. And they're eating pasta or rice, or they're having a beer, bourbon, whatever it is. So that's the thing too. We have to be very conscious of everything we're putting in. A lot of parents that I talk to, part of their helping their children is keeping a good food diary. So they know when and what they're getting each day. And, you may go, well, I haven't given them any sugar. But then once you look back at it and you go, well, all that bread, all that pasta, mac and cheese, even though it was organic, or you made it with good, clean cheese. The cheese is an inflammatory and the pasta turns to sugar. So they're definitely um, something to consider when you look at the whole diet. And I know it's difficult, especially for parents with kids on the spectrum, because they may get stuck on one thing or not be willing to try other foods or whatever. But that's something where you have to put in the work to figure out a way to get something else in their system. I know it's easier said than done, but ultimately it could be what you're feeding them every day that's causing a large portion of the problem. So if you can correct that and start working them out of that challenge, then you might also find it easier to get them to try to eat a little bit healthier, because they're not so fixated on a certain food or whatever. So enzymes. Now, what about as far as supplementation, like digestive enzymes, probiotics, prebiotics? You could end up, this is one thing I thought of too, because we're sponsored by our company, Spectrum Research Group. We make a supplement that helps kids with autism, ADHD, on and off the spectrum. It helps with anxiety, depression, focus, sleep, all of that. But you can quickly end up spending several $100s a month on supplements. So, I talk to parents all the time. They have to make a choice. They have to decide whether they're going to keep doing this or they're going to do something else. So, if you discover through an elimination diet that there are certain foods triggering certain behaviors or symptoms, and then you realize that maybe some digestive help, a digestive enzyme or pre or probiotic might be in order, is that something that you have to continue to give them every day for the rest of their life? Or is it something that once you get a handle on things and maybe the diet is proper, that it will maintain that health on its own? How much do you lean on supplements like pre and probiotic and enzymes?
So, well, what's interesting is, when we first started the healing, I feel like we spent a lot of money on supplements. And over time, we sort of were able to decrease the amount of supplements, right? So, as far as probiotics, like it's all about gut diversity. So, if we are providing our body with probiotics and then also prebiotics, which is the fiber that's feeding the probiotic, we should be able to create our own new system. Unfortunately, what happens is when we introduce an antibiotic or we introduce pesticide food, anything that could potentially kill the good bacteria in there, we have to almost start all over. It's like we have a sterile gut. So if we've been sick and we've had to be taking antibiotic or something, it's always important. Even if we take oregano, right? I did oregano for 30 days, but then I needed to kind of repopulate my gut, because even though it's a little smarter than an antibiotic, it was still killing off microbes. So we kind of have to reintroduce the probiotic. But ideally, unlike Western medicine, we should never have to rely on these things forever. We should get to a point which our diets, if we're eating healthy, we're eating clean with no pesticides and things, we should be able to maintain it. But it really depends, because some people's biochemistry, because of certain genetic mutations, their body may not, if I didn't know this, I don't have an appendix. That's where our ancient biome is. So I was probably very deficient having children. No OBGYN ever told me, like, make sure you take your probiotics every day while you're pregnant, because you're passing all these gut biomes. And and you had a C-section, don't forget to seed your baby like they do in Europe, which is actually they feed the baby the mother's natural gut flora after a C-section. They don't do that here. They should.
Right.
And if you're watching the show and you're pregnant and you have a C-section, make sure that happens, because you're seeding your baby's immune system. They don't tell you that. So there's so many things. So yes, probiotics could be very helpful. We should probably be off. Take one particular one, get off for 3 months, do another, different strains, different brands, and digestive enzymes again. Very, very important while you have a gut problem, because your body, if you're inflamed, your body's probably not breaking down the nutrients the way it should. And so you probably need something to help break down the fat, break down the proteins, break down, the food, which can help the body assimilate the nutrients definitely in a better way. Um, Again, once you heal the gut, you may or may not need those as much. So a kid will eat broccoli and say, my stomach hurts. That's why they're picky, because
Mm.
the body's not breaking down the rough food. So one thing is very much suggested is to do cooked, at least partially cooked vegetables, not to do raw vegetables if you have a child with an immune issue going on in the gut. And again, it really depends. Like type A people, type A blood people, don't have enough digestive enzymes in their gut normally. They don't have enough hydrochloric acid. So if you're an A positive person, and they do better in plant-based diets, but we need meat for certain nutrients. So this is where it gets a little tricky. So some of these people need probiotic, probably need a digestive enzyme. And then most of our guts are inflamed. A lot of us need a digestive enzyme, at least for a while, until we can get the body doing what it's supposed to do.
Right.
Basis place. So it really depends, because we're so bio-individual. I mean, somebody might need to be on it for the rest of their life, and someone else really only needs to be on it for 3 months while they're healing the gut. So,
And then a lot of it has to do with how well you're able to correct the diet overall. If your diet is still sketchy,
right.
then you're going to need that support more often. So, regardless of this, this thing that's probably not new to everybody, but is new on paper now that so we see this study shows that there's not a chemical link between serotonin and depression. So what does that mean? Nothing for right now, right? So you don't want to jump in and just stop all your medication, because that's going to develop that'll cause problems of its own. So that's something you want to talk with your doctor about. But a food diary is a great start, because you want to write down what you're eating, when you're eating, how you react to it, how you feel, not just what you eat and when you eat, but how you feel afterwards, how long it takes you to eliminate afterwards. Like, is it working from beginning to end, so to speak, the way it should be? Those are all important factors that you want to, figure in, because like you mentioned, you eat broccoli, it hurts your tummy. Now you don't want to eat broccoli because it hurts your tummy. Well, that's good information, because that means that you're not digesting the broccoli properly. So if you like it and you can eat it, but it's not sitting well with you, there's a reason for that. So maybe that's where we need to supplement with a digestive enzyme that's meant for plant material or whatever. That gut brain connection is something that we were very aware of when we produced our product. That's why, even though the product is for calm sleep and focus, we included a digestive enzyme blend in the product. Now, it's not enough to completely replace a daily digestive enzyme, but it is a blend that was created specifically for the ingredients in our product. And we did that because we found that more often than not, the folks that we were talking to, they or the person they were caring for has digestive issues and inflammation, which is one of the things that having a digestive system that's not working properly causes that systemic inflammation. So we included that digestive enzyme in there to help set the stage for the ingredients to work better, to balance out the endocannabinoid system. And then another product that we have, which is a cellular cleanse, includes broccoli sprout, a ingredient called brassica, which is derived from broccoli sprouts, and that helps with cellular cleanse. But when we looked at that, we said, how can we make this a really powerful formula? So we added a very clean and powerful curcumin derivative called UltraCur, is the name brand, which is a very effective anti-inflammatory. So the detox product that we put out has a very powerful anti-inflammatory effect that works to help even with the cellular detox. And then the product that we put out to help balance the endocannabinoid system also includes something to help support some digestive uh, digestive work while you're taking the product anyway. So that's always something that it's been on our radar, as far as you don't just deal, don't just give them something that puts them to sleep. Don't just give them something that helps. We also have to deal with some of the other issues that might be contributing to that. So um, now, we talked about this a little bit last time we talked, but school is starting soon. We're just starting this coming Monday. Other states are already back to school. As Now that things in most places that have half a brain are starting to loosen up a little bit, kids are not being muzzled in all places now, and a lot of the COVID protocols that were in place that I think were very discouraging and dehumanizing, especially for young kids. A lot of that stuff has fallen by the wayside. But as we send kids back to school, right? What are some of the things that we can look for? What are some of the changes that we might see occurring if they are starting to suffer from some anxiety or some depression? They're not always good at communicating. They don't always know themselves that that's what's happening. So they might just change some of the behavior a little bit. What are some of the things we can look for as we send our kids back to school?
So one of the things that often happen is that they get angry. So anger is usually really anxiety showing its ugly head, right? So a lot of people, not just children, know how to express anger. But when you really talk about it, it's usually sadness, fear. And so if your child gets angry, try to have a conversation instead of trying to, honestly, the energy goes up and then ours goes up and then theirs goes up. So that's important. Obviously, now that we're back, hopefully sort of normal, I do notice that a lot of kids have kind of pulled themselves out of extracurricular activities because, they didn't want to do it with a mask, or they lost contact with some of their friends. So they don't want to go back to play baseball again because their friends aren't their friends anymore, So it really was very disruptive. I mean, I don't think we gave in this country at all enough credit to the fact that our children suffered during that time. And this was not a good. So, anytime we can encourage our kids to go back to an activity, to join a club, anything like that, because the social connectedness has really caused a lot of depression and anxiety in our kids. It's a traumatic event or
Mm-hmm.
events. So, if kids are not engaging, if kids are yelling and angry, if kids are hiding in their rooms on their cell phones all day and not inviting a friend over. I mean, we need the social interaction. And in this country, in this world now, it's like so much. I mean, I asked my kids to like make a phone call the other day. You'd think I was asking them to like birth a child or something. I was just like, they're like, oh, I can't. Ridiculous. I
I
mean,
have friends that won't answer the phone, but you text them and you call, it goes to voicemail.
oh, it drives me crazy. I mean, I like to talk on the phone. I like to,
Right.
or in person. The whole texting thing drives me crazy, but I think, we've sort of enabled the children to isolate themselves in their rooms with their phones, watching YouTube videos, or whatever they're doing. I mean, we all need some downtime, but like at the same time, and it's easier to just let them stay on their devices all day, but that's a clue that they're not connecting. Addiction also, it's interesting. Addiction, whether it be substances, phones, shopping, it all comes down to one thing, and that's usually social connectedness. We don't really understand that, most people just take that for granted, but I think that that's a huge problem now. The kids are not connecting. They're not spending time with friends like they used to when we were kids. They don't problem solve. They don't have the ability, they seem to not have the ability to kind of toughen up, right?
Right.
Resiliency in our kids, like it's a huge problem. They can't, the simplest things, the simplest tasks, it's like, what bowl do I use to make this pasta? And it's like, really? um
Right.
because they're not living in the world, they're like
Right.
somewhere else. So we really need to encourage, and although it's painful and we're all busy and it's hard, we really have to be engaging with our kids, talking with them. If they're not having conversations with us and they're not opening up about things, I mean, obviously they're, teenagers, for example, aren't the best at that, but we should be encouraging that and providing, that kind of.
One thing I thought of, just being in the, so I didn't, I bet you this happened to a lot of people too growing up. So I actually started writing a blog, and then I thought this sounds kind of whiny, so I stopped. But when I was a kid, I was afraid of the monster in the closet, right? And then as I got older and I realized there was no such thing as monsters, I didn't stop being afraid of things. I started being afraid of things that were more realistic. So now I know there's not a monster, but someone could break in and kill me. I read something on the new or see something on the news about a local burglary or something, and that's something that would freak me out until I was on to the next thing. Um, and that kind of followed me right through life. Then I had kids, and I was afraid of what could happen to them, and I'd have these bouts that I later understood was anxiety and were panic attacks.
Right.
But at the time, because there was a name for it, the monster in the closet, the burglar down the road, the car accident potential, that I just thought, well, I was freaking out about that thing. But what was happening was I was having a panic attack, and my mind was finding something to dwell on to feed the panic attack. And once I got older and when I got into this industry, I started talking to people and listening to some of the physical attributes that come with that, right? And then my wife was pregnant, and we had hurricane come through,
Mm.
and the barometric pressure and the hormones were a perfect cocktail to give her a panic attack. And that was something then that stuck with her. So she has, used to have them occasionally, especially around her cycle. But my point is the physical attributes of it, when she explained them to me, then the next time I had one, I started thinking I was dying, having a heart attack, and I was only like 40 something.
Mm.
Um, but then I realized, wow, I'm feeling exactly what my wife was describing, right? And then I put it together. Wow, this is what it feels like every time I was afraid, laid in bed, afraid of the monster in the closet, laid in bed thinking about one of my kids in a car accident, like whatever the thought was at that. So here's a big one for parents. If your kid is afraid of something, monster under the bed, or very anxious about going to school or whatever it is, and there's anger involved or there's fear involved, talk to them about the physical process that they're going through, because everybody at some point in life is going to be afraid of something, and you might be able to just talk them through it, and then they realize it's not a big deal and they move forward. But other times you might have a kid who has episodes pretty regularly, but because they say something that you think is silly,
Mm.
like there's a monster, and you go, there's no such thing as monsters, and you think it's silly. But if you find that it's reoccurring, s- talk to them about the way it feels to them physically. When you're afraid, how does that make you feel? Is your heart beating? What is your breathing like? Because with me, I would get dizzy. I'd feel like I was going to pass out. Like it was a whole deal, right? Probably a very familiar feeling. I think it's important when we have those opportunities and we know something's going on to ask some questions maybe we normally don't think of asking of our kids. And that might help, because if they're super nervous about going to school, that's natural. But if they feel like they're going to die while they're nervous about it, and they can't breathe or they feel dizzy or whatever, that's an indication to you that it's not just something that's in their head or something you can educate them and love them through. It's also something that may have another root, like digestive issues or inflammation or something else that needs to be addressed. So, yeah, I would highly recommend to parents that if they're seeing a reoccurring theme, especially
Mhm.
of fear and anxiety, talk to them about the physical things that they're feeling as well. It may help you realize that something uh, simple can be done, although it may not, it'll be simple, but it will take a while, changing their diet, something like that. So definitely ask them about that. Um, well, I was,
That when you say that too, what it reminds me of is OCD. So when you know anxiety has gone too far is when they can't break the loop. Like you said, if they're just afraid to go to school because they're starting a brand new school and they're going to talk through it. And then the next day they're like, oh, yeah, it's fine. Why, mom? But if you're obsessing about something, or if your child's obsessing, and sometimes it's very silent, they may have thoughts like, I have to do this, or this bad thing is going to happen. They don't talk about it. a lot of times. And so it's very important as parents that we're asking those very specific questions. Do you have anything that you think about often? I mean,
Mm.
sometimes it's obvious because there's a behavior attached to it. Like they check the lock in the front door 3 times before they went to bed. But often, like especially teenagers, like they might have to brush their hair 15 times on both sides, but you may not notice, right? And so very important that in my on my website Healing Without Hurting, I think I've an article like the 11 signs of harm OCD that no one's talking about, right?
Mm.
It talks about gut health, it talks about PANS or pandas, pediatric autoimmune encephalitis, it talks about nutrition, digestion, all of those things. And so it's very much overlooked. But OCD is just anxiety gone crazy. So it's actually not an anxiety disorder by itself. What it is, it's trying to quell the anxiety. So if you have tremendous anxiety, you have to do something to try to quiet the anxiety down.
Ah.
So that's really what OCD is. And unfortunately, when children have this kind of anxiety and it's very quiet, a personal story, I have my best friend's son, ended up killing himself. And they come to find out that he had thoughts for a very long time that he didn't share with anyone. And you can tell from his Google searches how OCD he was, and the note that he left, how OCD, like, so if you have a negative thought and you keep thinking about it and it never gets interrupted, that's a recipe for a very bad thing to potentially happen. And so this is why it's so important that we're checking in. Most of the time, the OCD is, positive things, and they're not perseverating on something like harm OCD. But dark thoughts, very homeopathy can help with that. Diet, exercise. I mean, there's so many things we can do. EMDR, which is what I do for trauma, is very helpful in interrupting those very negative OCD type of thoughts. So that's a very important. So when you talked about how we could tell in our body when there's a physical sensation, that's important because most people aren't even in touch with that. Um,
Mm.
and some people with anxiety, they're up here. They're not even in their body. So sometimes you can ask a really anxious person, how does it feel in your body? They can't tell you because they don't spend any time there. And so EMDR and certain, that's why yoga is so important and breathing is so important and exercise is so important because it takes us out of here and puts us back in our body.
Mm.
You ask a child, like, how does it feel in your heart? Is your heart racing? And they go, I don't know. Like, can you feel where the anxiety is? No. I mean, sometimes it's just them being, adolescents, and it's another, they're not in their body enough to even know.
Right.
Right. So
That makes sense.
it's sometimes tricky, and that's why we have to be, sleuths as parents, and we have to ask a lot of questions, even if they think we're annoying. And
Well, and let's not forget that they have no right to privacy.
exactly.
And if they live in your house and they're under 18, they have no right to privacy. And I can't, I'm sure you've heard this way more than I have. I had no clue what was happening or that he needed help until I found his diary. Like you mentioned, Google search history. So, you know, we're for whatever reason we've come to this point in life that they tell us that we have to respect our kids the way we would respect a self-sufficient adult that's not related to us. And the respect, sure, but the privacy, no. So, snoop in your kids' room,
Yeah.
look and see what they're really up to, because a lot of times they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're incapable, they don't understand how much they need to communicate this with you. And so you may stumble upon something, and don't let your first reaction be anger. Try to have some understanding and approach it in a way that would offer help and love and support, not just anger or shame, because they're already feeling shamed, I'm sure. So don't be tricked into thinking that it's wrong to snoop in your kid's room, because you may find that thing that will save them, and help them quite a bit too. So have these awkward conversations, and if you still feel like something's going on, feel free to snoop. It's your house. They don't own the room that you do. So that's important, I think, sometimes too.
Very much. My best friend was like, she's like, my biggest mistake was that I told him that he could have privacy. Right. Because, he's a 14-year-old boy. She doesn't want to walk in there and find any surprises. Right. And so
Right.
I left it to the dad to handle, like the things that we do in our minds that making it okay. When she would say, "Oh, well, he's just a quiet kid," or he'll, we make excuses for behavior that our gut feeling knows is something wrong. So that's the other thing, is really to trust our gut as parents, because it's usually right. So don't
Right.
a thought or a feeling, or I just don't like the way he looked at me this morning. We have to really, pay attention, because, and that's why when we're on our devices and we're distracted, and I mean, things happen, we're not going to be there 100% of the time, and we can never blame ourselves, obviously, but at the same time, we just have to try to do the best we can. It's tough. It's the hardest job we ever have to do, is being a parent, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I joke, it's the most and least rewarding all in one package. It gives you the greatest joy and the most anxiety.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so painful, and we do the best we can with what we have. But
So the takeaway from this is, just because we've now discovered there's no chemical connection, which a lot of people suspected for a long time anyway, doesn't mean we change everything. They still need our love and our support, our kindness and our help. But there are some ways that we can look outside of the typical big pharma solution, and that is diet, inflammation, maybe fungus, digestive enzymes. So a food diary is a good start. A behavior diary should be done in connection with the food diary, really, because then you'll start to see where I fed him this and this occurred. I fed him this and they felt that way. So definitely, the more awareness that we can have on the impact of what they're eating and what they're doing, versus how they're feeling, and what the behavioral consequence of that is definitely going to be helpful for us as we eliminate things that are aggravating the condition. So,
yeah.
well, Jennifer, I really appreciate you being on today. You always have some great information, always very helpful for our viewers. So really appreciate it. And as I mentioned, we'll have links. If you'll send me some specific links so that I can put in the description of the video, so people can see where to buy your books and to enroll in that upcoming, in September 2022, the upcoming, what's the name of it officially?
Oh, I think it's like Integrative Wellness for Mental Health or something like that.
Okay. All right. So
It's being housed by IPAK. So IPAK is a online university. So that's who is housing the program, and will be, Q&A boards up there. And I could also send you the syllabus. So any of your subscribers, if they're interested in understanding what exactly was going to be taught each week, I kind of wrote it all down. So, to give
cool.
more of an understanding of what this is going to be about.
Okay, great. And then, send me a link. That way nobody has to Google it or look for it and stumble upon the wrong thing or whatever. They can go directly to it and get signed up and benefit from it. So
Good.
Well, all right. Do you have anything to add for the cause?
Well, I mean, only that all of your products are fantastic, and because it's addressing metabolic, immunologic, and digestive woes, which is basically what mental health really is in a nutshell. And we have to get it kind of away from that mainstream thinking and really start addressing the gut. So thank you so much for having me on, and
Thank you.
I appreciate all of your information too.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. We sure appreciate you, and you have a good one.
Thank you.
Take care. All right. So Jennifer's always a great guest. We always love having her on. We are winding down now, so we went a little over time. So we're going to let you get back to your life here at the end. Again, I'm Gabriel Williams. I am the CEO of Spectrum Research Group, and we are the maker of Neural Balance with Anandinol, our keystone product, and also Neural Brock, which is a cellular cleanse. You can learn all about all our products by going to neuralbalance.com and clicking on the How It Works tab. Check out our community on Facebook just by searching Neural Balance on Facebook, or you can also search Neural Balance Support Group on Facebook. A lot of great peer-to-peer support there. It's not just all about our products. It's, suggestions and questions from parents and caregivers just like you. It's a great resource. And you can search for us on YouTube at the Spectrum Report TV. And as I mentioned earlier, for our uncensored content, the stuff that they would ban us from Facebook or YouTube from, you can search the Spectrum Report Uncensored on rumble.com for that exclusive content. We sure do appreciate you watching today. If the show helped, please share it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the comments section, and make sure you look for all the links in the description of the video for Jennifer's books and her upcoming webinar that you can take part in. It's I believe she said 15-week course that she is teaching, and will also be available after the fact. So click on the link, get signed up for that. You will be glad that you did. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.
Because of neurobalance, my daughter can sleep through the night consistently, which hasn't happened in years, and we are so thankful.